Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking at a cluster of breaking news reports about two recent plane crashes.
Yeah, it's quite a bit to unpack.
Yeah, you've got some fast-moving info here, so let's get you up to speed, listeners.
Yeah, for sure. These are complex situations, so, understanding all the facts is really crucial.
Exactly. And to understand the facts, you need sources, and we have sources.
Oh, we've got sources. We've got a few articles from CBS News.
AP News.
Yep, AP News. And we've even got one in German from Tagesschau.de.
Okay, so that's our material. What's our mission for today's Deep Dive?
Well, we need to figure out, what are the most important things that you need to know about these crashes?
Yeah, are there any connections between the two?
And how are the investigations shaping up?
Yeah, lots of questions to answer, so let's just dive right in.
Let's dive in.
Okay, first up, the crash in South Korea. A Jeju Air Boeing 737-800 crash while landing at Muan International Airport on Sunday, December 29th, 2024.
But that was just yesterday.
I know, right? The plane was returning from Bangkok.
And it had 181 people on board.
Wow.
173 South Korean passengers.
Okay.
2 Thai nationals.
Got it.
And 6 crew members.
Okay, so quite a full flight. Sadly, at least 124 people were killed.
Yeah, this makes it one of South Korea's worst aviation disasters ever.
And the footage? Have you seen the footage?
That footage is just chilling, honestly.
It's chilling. The plane skidded across the runway, apparently with its landing gear still closed.
Yeah, still closed.
And slammed into a concrete wall.
Just, the impact caused a huge fire. And honestly, only the tail assembly was even recognizable.
It's just devastating.
Absolutely devastating. Authorities are looking into, well, a few possible causes. One is a bird strike. The control tower, actually, they had issued a warning to the pilot shortly before the crash.
Oh, so they knew there were birds in the area.
It seems that way, yeah. Which adds another layer to the investigation.
It does make you wonder.
They're also considering, of course, a landing gear malfunction.
Which, seems likely, given the,
Does seem likely.
given the footage.
Given everything we've heard.
Makes you wonder if it was, I don't know, maybe one or the other, maybe a combination of both.
Right, who knows? Nightmare scenario. But
No.
but luckily,
Yeah.
they've already retrieved the flight data recorder, what we call the black box.
Ah, the black box. So it's like, we've got a detective on the case now.
We
right?
do, exactly.
And it'll tell us what was happening with the plane systems
And the pilot's actions.
leading up to the crash.
So this crash comes at a sensitive time, I think, for South Korea. The country's in a state of political turmoil after the acting president was impeached.
So they're dealing with a leadership crisis
So at the same time,
as this horrific disaster.
it's a lot for any nation to handle.
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the lasting impact of these events, especially given that the last major air disaster in South Korea was way back in 1997 when a Korean airplane crashed in Guam, killing 228 people.
Yeah. These events can leave scars on a nation's psyche. Okay, let's shift gears for a minute.
Yeah.
Look at the Azerbaijan Airlines crash. This one's got some very intriguing elements to it.
Intriguing might be an understatement. An Azerbaijan Airlines Embraer 190 crashed on Christmas Day in Aktau, Kazakhstan.
Christmas Day, yeah.
It was en route from Baku, Azerbaijan to Grozny, Russia.
And tragically, 38 people were killed, but 29 survived.
That's a lot of survivors for a plane crash. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even a little bit scary. There's a lot of talk that this plane might have been accidentally shot down by Russian air defenses.
Yeah, it's a serious allegation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And while Russia initially blamed a bird strike,
Of course they did.
they later admitted that air defense systems were active, firing near Grozny Airport at the time of the crash.
So they were firing missiles in the same airspace
Pretty much, yeah.
where this passenger plane was trying to land.
It certainly raises a lot of concerns. And U.S. officials and an Azerbaijani minister have publicly stated that they believe the plane was brought down by, well, an external weapon.
And get this, Russian President Putin actually apologized to Azerbaijan's president for what he called a tragic incident,
Yeah.
but stopped short of accepting responsibility.
Right. It's a carefully worded statement, for sure. An apology without admitting fault.
Feels like everyone's being very cautious with their language right now, which just, adds to the mystery.
Yeah, it does. And this crash has had some significant consequences already. Azerbaijan Airlines has suspended flights to multiple Russian airports.
Yeah.
And other international airlines are halting service to Russia as well.
Really?
Yeah.
So this one incident is having like a ripple effect
Big ripple effect, yeah.
across the entire region.
Yeah. I mean, people are worried about safety, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, for sure, creating a lot of uncertainty.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got two major crashes within just a few days of each other,
Crazy, right?
both with like unique circumstances.
Yeah, they're both really unique.
It's a lot to take in. Is there any way to connect these crashes? Like, are they just a tragic coincidence, or is there something bigger at play here?
Well, I think that's the question everyone is asking. And while the investigations are still going on, both events raise really serious concerns about aviation safety, especially in the context of geopolitical conflicts.
It's a good point. I mean, in the South Korean crash, we're looking at, potential technical failures or human error. But the Azerbaijan Airlines crash brings up a whole other set of issues.
Yeah, it does.
The dangers of civilian aircraft operating in or near active conflict zones.
It's a stark reminder that even with all of our technology and all of our safety protocols, air travel, it's not without risks. And those risks can be magnified when you factor in geopolitical tensions and, well, frankly, the use of military equipment.
So it kind of begs the question, how do we balance the need for security with the safety of civilian air travel, especially in areas where there's conflict?
That is the million-dollar question. And it's a very complex issue with no easy answers.
It certainly is. Well, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, but there's still more to explore.
Yeah.
The investigations into both crashes are ongoing, and we're going to need to follow the developments very closely.
Yeah, lots of moving pieces to keep track of. It
Yeah.
seems like the more we dig into these crashes, the more complicated they get.
Absolutely. It really does feel like every detail adds another layer, which is why, it's so important to make sure we're getting information from reliable sources and not jumping to conclusions. We're still putting the pieces together.
Right. And like you mentioned earlier, it'll be really interesting to see what the black box data reveals from the South Korea crash. Does it support what the witnesses are saying? Does it line up with those initial findings?
Right. Those are the questions.
Yeah.
And each piece of data, each piece could hold an important clue. And speaking of clues, what do you make of Russia's response so far to the Azerbaijan crash?
It's been, well, let's just say interesting. It's been interesting for sure. First, they blame it on a bird strike, then admit their air defense systems were active in the area. Kind of hard not to raise an eyebrow at that, right?
Yeah, it's a tough spot for them, to be honest. If they come out and say, yeah, we accidentally shot down a civilian airliner, well, I mean, that would have massive consequences. Diplomatic fallout, political backlash, especially with everything going on in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, it would be a huge international incident. But on the other hand, that bird strike explanation just doesn't seem to add up, does it? I mean, multiple holes in the fuselage, passengers injured by what looks like shrapnel.
It's highly unlikely to be a bird, that's for sure. And the more information that comes out, the less credible that initial claim seems. There's a lot of pressure from the international community for a full independent investigation. And with the U.S. coming out and saying they believe it was shot down, that pressure on Russia is just going to keep building.
So where do you see this going? What happens next? If it turns out that Russia is responsible, what are the potential consequences?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think you could see some serious repercussions. More sanctions, increased isolation from the international community. It would definitely damage their reputation on a global scale. And it would probably escalate tensions with Azerbaijan even further. They've already suspended flights to Russia.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty strong statement.
It is. They've lost citizens in this tragedy. They have every right to be demanding answers and accountability. And it really underscores how serious this whole situation is. This crash, it's shaken the entire region. It shows how quickly a seemingly contained conflict, it can spill over and have these huge ripple effects.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we live in a very interconnected world. What happens in one place can have consequences for everyone.
Yeah.
And this incident raises some even bigger questions, too. Like, what is the responsibility of a nation to protect civilian aircraft, especially in or near a conflict zone?
That's such an important question. We have these international agreements in place, the Chicago Convention, for example, which sets rules for air travel and outlines the responsibilities of nations to make sure it's safe. But as we've seen here, those agreements aren't always enough to prevent these tragedies.
They're not. So what can we do? How do we make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's complex, and there are no simple solutions, but I think it starts with acknowledging the problem, having these tough conversations, reevaluating those existing agreements, strengthening safety protocols, coming up with ways to better protect civilian planes, especially in those areas where there's active fighting.
Right? It's a huge challenge.
It is, but it's one we can't ignore.
Definitely not, with so many lives at stake. And, beyond these big picture issues, it's important to remember the human cost of these events, the families who have lost loved ones, the survivors who are dealing with, the physical and emotional trauma, the first responders who had to witness this awful scene. It's them who are bearing the weight of this.
That's so true. It's so easy to get lost in the technical details, the investigations, all the geopolitics of it all. But we have to remember that at the heart of this are people, real people whose lives are forever changed.
That's a good point. So to recap, we've talked about possible causes, the investigations that are underway, the fallout on the world stage, and the human toll of these crashes. If our listeners could only take away a couple of things from all of this, what would they be?
Well, first of all, it's a stark reminder that air travel, even when we're not talking about war zones, has inherent risks. Even with all the safety measures in place, accidents can happen. And when you add conflict into the mix, those risks increase dramatically. Whether it's intentional or accidental, planes can become targets.
So for anyone traveling, it's really important to be aware of what's happening in the world, right? Consider those risks when you're planning a trip.
Absolutely. Stay informed. And remember, these investigations take time. Be patient and let the experts do their work. Don't jump to conclusions, and be careful about spreading information that hasn't been verified.
There's definitely a lot of speculation and conflicting reports out there.
That's normal in these situations, but it's so important to stick to reliable sources and confirmed information. And I think as these investigations progress, it's also worth thinking about how these tragedies can lead to positive change. Could this be the push we need for stronger safety rules, more transparency, a more proactive approach to security, especially with all the new challenges like drones and unmanned aircraft?
Those are all great questions.
I think so.
It's hard to say what the future holds, but these crashes have definitely revealed some vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah, and hopefully that leads to some real meaningful improvements.
Exactly. The safety and security of everyone who flies should be a top priority, always. We owe it to the victims of these crashes and to all future passengers to learn from this and work towards making flying safer for everyone.
I completely agree. We've talked a lot about the need for better rules and regulations, more transparency, a renewed focus on safety from governments and airlines. But I also think there's a part for each of us to play here, too, a sense of individual responsibility.
What do you mean by that?
I think as passengers, it's easy to just take it all for granted. We buckle our seatbelts, watch a movie, maybe get a little sleep. But how often do we stop and really think about all the complex systems, the people working behind the scenes to make sure we get to our destination safely?
It's a good point. We don't always think about all the people involved.
So I think in addition to demanding change from the top down, we can also cultivate a deeper appreciation for, the wonder of flight. Be more aware of the risks involved, be a little more grateful for the folks who are keeping us safe.
Yeah. Take a moment to think about what an amazing feat it is to fly,
Yeah.
All that engineering, all those people working together to make it happen.
Exactly. A little gratitude and awareness can go a long way.
Couldn't agree more. All right, folks, that's going to do it for our deep dive today into these two plane crashes. You're now up to date on what happened, what we know, and what questions still need to be answered.
We've covered a lot of ground, but the conversation about aviation safety is far from over.
And we hope this deep dive encourages you to keep thinking about these issues, to engage in these conversations, because ultimately, we all have a stake in making sure flying is as safe as possible.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. And I think, the big takeaway here is that aviation safety, it's a shared responsibility.
It really is. Governments, airlines, regulators.
Passengers even.
Yeah, everyone's got a role to play. We all got to work together to make flying as safe as we possibly can. Exactly. And as we kind of, wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave our listeners with a few things to consider moving forward. First, as these investigations continue, what changes, if any, do you think we'll see? Will airlines or governments actually do something to improve safety?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Will we see stricter regulations, Will there be more transparency, a greater emphasis on the risks that come with flying near conflict zones? It's hard to say for sure right now, but it's definitely something we'll be keeping a close eye on.
And, looking at the even bigger picture here, how do you think these events, these crashes, are going to shape the future of air travel, especially as things heat up around the world and with more and more technology like drones in the air.
It's a tough one. I mean, it's a complicated situation out there. And I think these events have really exposed some vulnerabilities, some weak points.
Yeah,
We need to, have some serious discussions about how we adapt to these new challenges, how we update our safety protocols.
for sure. Yeah, and I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, something that's really important, that human element. It's easy as a passenger to kind of just zone out when you're flying, right? You get on the plane, buckle up, watch a movie, take a nap. But do we ever really stop and think about all the complex systems, all the people working so hard behind the scenes to make sure that we get to our destination?
It's true, we don't. We kind of forget that there are actual people behind all that technology, all those rules and regulations, the airlines themselves. It's easy to get caught up in the whole experience of traveling and kind of lose sight of all the work, all the dedication and skill that it takes to keep us safe in the air.
It is. So maybe, along with pushing for change at the system level, at the top, we can also try to appreciate, the wonder of flight a little bit more, be aware of the risks, be thankful for the folks who are working hard to keep us safe.
Yeah, just take a minute to think about how incredible it is, that we can even fly. It's an incredible achievement, a real testament to engineering and collaboration and human ingenuity.
That's a great way to put it. All right, folks, that's a wrap for today for our deep dive into these two plane crashes. We hope you found this information helpful and, that it gets you thinking.
Definitely. Stay informed. Keep asking those tough questions.
And until next time, keep exploring and keep learning. If you enjoy our daily news podcast and want to stay updated, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications. Your support really helps us bring you the latest news every day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.